This presentation, much as I'd like it to be about the difference between cost and value, is not about cost and value. That's another very interesting topic. And let me just say that value is very much in the eye of the beholder. A quick example, 5 cents would be an extraordinary difference between a successful tender and a considered tender, 5 cents per service. It's not much as a 5 cent piece, but 5 cents is considered to be an insurmountable difference. And if we look at that cost over the length of a typical contract, 5 cents, say, times 50,000 houses times 7 years, that'd be $910,000. So rightly so, it's an enormous amount of money, and particularly councillors really would have a lot of difficulty making a decision to appoint somebody who is 5 cents more expensive than somebody else. If you cut the rate by 5 cents, that could include a lot of service reductions. But 5 cents saves you $2.60 per annum per household, about the price of a packet of Tim Tams when they're on special. And I just, at the outset, say, do you think a resident who'd experienced a lot of service problems during the course of a year would be happy if you said, but we're going to give you a free packet of Tim Tams? Clearly not. Clearly not. There are lots of quotes around about what value really is, and I would just summarise them by saying the inferior product is remembered much longer than the cheaper price. That doesn't mean you have to go for the cheaper or the most expensive price every time, but it's something worth recognising. Okay, what does a council want in their tender? First of all, they want happy residents. That's really the main thing that a council wants. You can't really have complaining residents, because complaining residents vote their council representatives out. They take up the time of council and they make your life hell. And you can gauge whether a resident's happy by maybe an annual satisfaction survey, look at the level of complaints that you're getting, and as Tony and Greg and I were discussing before, it takes a fair bit to make some people happy, so you've got to gauge how much effort you need to put in to make people really happy. The council's obviously also looking for minimal disruption. You can't have noise waking up residents, and you can't have slow or late collection services causing traffic problems. The council's looking for clean and tidy streets. I mean, that's really the service you're providing. It's stopping people from just throwing their rubbish out on the street as they did in medieval times. So no spilt waste or spilt recyclables, and the bins replaced neatly on the curb at the end of the service. The costs have to be within the budget. Look, it'd be lovely to save a lot of money and say you've done a fantastic job, but really if the cost of the service is within the budget that you allocated, everyone's going to be pretty much happy, because we all know, whether it's private enterprise or the public sector, it's very painful if the budget's exceeded. Very, very painful. You absolutely want minimal risk. It's a given that you expect minimal risk from the service. So injury or death is obviously the worst possible scenario. You really can't afford to consider somebody who you think might be safe, but maybe they're not. And you don't want property damage and you don't want industrial disputes, so you want to avoid risk. It's great too for the council not to have to really go through a directory or go on a series of phone calls to get a point of contact. They should know exactly who they deal with the contractor, who is able to answer their questions. So a single point of contact, and obviously over the life of a contract, if that person is the same person, it makes it a really good contract, provided they're well qualified and they're a good person to deal with. And then you've got what we often call added value. Lots of tenders say, what can you supply in terms of added value? It might be some special waste education, might be a concept on minimising waste, it might be a concept in increasing recycling rates, promoting the service offering, some sort of innovative technology, quieter or lower emission vehicles. All of these things would be added value. When we look at what the resident wants, the the resident wants a couple of things, and then they've probably got a list of things that they're not aware of, but if you do them, they'll tell you very clearly they're things they don't want. There's a lot of things they don't want you to do. So they want a regular, consistent collection, same time and same day every week or every fortnight, so that they know exactly what the rules are as far as they're concerned. They want a clear understanding of what the service parameters are. They know what day the clean-up is, obviously what day the collection, time and day the collection is going to be, what's allowed in the bin. You know, they need to understand what they're allowed to put in the bin and what they're not allowed to put in the bin. And clearly, when we're talking about recyclables, the most common questions you get about waste composition is what is recyclable and what isn't. And then the list of things they don't want. They don't want missed services. They don't want spills on their curbside. They can't stand excessive noise. Early starts are obviously combined with excessive noise. They don't want you running up onto the curb and damaging their lawn or hitting their letterbox. They probably don't even think of safety risk because they, like I said before, they assume that there is no safety risk. You've addressed that. Otherwise, why would the council engage someone who is going to be a threat to safety? They definitely don't want confrontations with the driver. You know, lots of people are scared of truck drivers. So you don't want rude, aggressive drivers. You absolutely have to have people, a contractor has to be able to employ people who are going to be polite even at the end of a stressful day. And once again, they want a simple point of contact. Who do I call if I've got a complaint, if I've got service questions, if there are missed collections, if the bin needs replacement? You don't want to have to go on a merry-go-round of trying to find out who's the right person to call. What the collection contractor, since he's entered into a contract, wants should be exactly the same thing. But really, the ideal service proposition for a collection contractor is somewhere where he can achieve high productivity, whether easy access streets, minimal number of parked cars, peak hours are able to be done early before the peak traffic interrupts his day, and there's an easy run to the tip or the MRF. There has to be a safe working environment. He's got to have clear lines of sight wherever he's driving, so little kiddies can't run out and there's no risk. The driver absolutely doesn't want to injure anyone. So children and pedestrians are a concern for drivers too. There have to be agreed service parameters, so realistic key performance indicators, and the contractor has to know that what you quoted on only is what you have to do. There aren't going to be the things that you quoted on and then a list of other things you weren't aware of that you're expected to do. For a contractor, I've worked in private enterprise all my life, and I've sat through a lifetime of management meetings where we've talked about the financial performance. And if it's according to the prediction, everything's sweet. Really, there is huge risk in a windfall profit for a contractor or a windfall saving for a council. Both of those things, to me, spell risk. Predictable financial performance gives predictable results. So no hidden costs, and if there are unusual, unexpected increased costs, they're somehow recoverable. There's a formula that allows you to get back things that you really weren't aware of. And once again, a point of contact, who do they go to get a straight answer? Who does the contractor build their relationship with? Who in the council that they deal with really understands that the job that they have to do? Look, it should be easy to do what you're paid to do. Some type of alliance with common goals between the council and the contractor would be the ideal situation. Unfortunately, in many contracts, the focus seems to be on, first of all, getting the cheaper price, and then the capacity for the council to use the big stick to penalise any mistake or tiny service glitch. Now, I'm not going to run through this list of points, but this is a series of breaches of service, potential breaches of service from a contract I saw recently, and all of these come with points and penalties potentially attached to them, all from the same contract. So 71 of them plus sub-clauses. I really don't think that would be an easy contract, and not one that would scare the hell out of me before I went into a contract there. So I'll hand over Tony to talk about some of the challenges that could be faced.
Thanks, Lee. So one of the things that every contractor wants, when the bids are out, is sufficient time to be able to put together a proper tender bid. to understand what the tender specification says, because if there's not sufficient time to understand what the tender is calling for, then there'll be a high probability or a strong probability that the tender won't be able to meet those conditions. Now, we've currently got a Western Sydney Council, which is the amalgamation of Holroyd and Auburn, currently out to tender. There's a compulsory tender meeting on the 16th of May. 8 days later, which doesn't include weekends, so it'd be less if you take into account working days. So 8 days later, the tenders close. Now, in the past, contractors have been given a 4-week period to be able to respond and complete their tenders following a compulsory tender meeting. So members bring that to our attention, and the next couple of days, once we get back from here, we'll try and do something about that with council. Poorly specified equipment and the number of services and the number of bins, that's a regular challenge for the contractor supervisor, especially at the start of a contract where the number of services or the equipment hasn't been adequately specified. Morris mentioned about unforeseen changes to remuneration and variations. That's always a challenge for the management of a contract. There's the straightforward CPI side, which most contractors can manage without a great deal of difficulty, but there are those more complex variations that cause some issues. And sometimes, some contractors think to themselves, well, I really do I really want to go that extra mile if it's going to cause grief in terms of remuneration, and because ultimately, these contractors aren't charities; they have to be compensated, for the efforts that they're putting in, and if they're extra efforts, then they need to be compensated for that. Disruptive individuals in the workforce. I'm going to come back to that later because I've got a slide a little bit later on in relation to the Central Coast contract. Industrial action. It seems to be these days that the focus of the union is more on those larger major contractors who have EBAs, and the union's only really interested in membership when all is said and done, and they figure that they can get their most membership from the larger yards. And that's a challenge for the management and the supervision of the company when the union gets involved. Changed traffic conditions, so the supervisor on a day-to-day basis, once the contract's awarded, will be faced with all these challenges, where there are events in the area, where there are construction taking place, and there's a lot of construction taking place in Sydney at the moment. And just councils who are focused on prescription and unrealistic management expectations, such as mandated collection times. That's probably the biggest complaint that we get at our office, is to do with mandated collection times by councils that cause grief in terms of safety, poor safety outcomes for contractors. Councils who ignore chain of responsibility obligations, who don't understand what their role is in chain of responsibility, because ultimately everyone who's in the supply chain under chain of responsibility is responsible for the safety of the driver wherever there's a vehicle that's greater than 4.5 tonne GVM. And simple things like being unable to collect from no stopping and no standing zones. The number of times that contractors have come to us and said, well, there's a series of places that we can't collect from because there's no stopping or no standing zones there. Challenges for the council waste manager. Look, it's a long period of time for council to endure a pain if they've made the wrong decision. Most contracts are 5 or 7 or 10 years, and it's important that council makes the right decision, so that the tenderer is given sufficient time to understand the tender requirements, so that the council and the contractor can then work together for the mutual benefit of all the residents. Over-emphasis in price in awarding contracts and poor choice of contractor. I think those two are related, and they're interrelated, and they ultimately result in a poor service outcome, and a poor service outcome that's the result of an over-emphasis on price and awarding the contract is really a lack of value, and it goes back to the points that Lee made originally. Contractors need to be satisfied on safety. They need to be able to satisfy their chain of responsibility obligations. Council need to assist with that. The contractor can't do it on their own. And the contractor often, finds, well, they're really focused on contract management, contract performance, and when it comes to, doing things that are of mutual benefit, they'll do them to the extent that it's in the contract. If it's beyond the contract, well, they'll expect to be compensated for it. Paradoxes and perverse outcomes. Look, minimising the tender period really does not always result in a great outcome. Tenders are complex. They're long documents. Contractors need to be able to get advice. They need to be able to go out and study the routes, especially if they're new to bidding in that particular area. They need to be able to study where are the busy streets, where are the cul-de-sacs, where are the high traffic areas, and actually be able to understand that so they can put together a tender that's going to ensure that there is no long-term pain. Lowest price, you'll hear this from us all the time, doesn't always guarantee the best value. It won't always give you the best service. It won't necessarily give you the happiest of residents, and it won't give you the best clean and tidy street outcomes. One party losing and another winning doesn't always sort of translate to a good outcome, as the same is with risk is better addressed if it's shared. And again, that's probably one of the biggest complaints that we get at the WACRA office, is that it's no longer about risk sharing in these contract operations. It's now about risk transfer. And council are happy to transfer as much of the risk across to the contractor as they possibly can. It's no longer a risk-sharing process that, in the past, contractors and council could talk through a lot of situations when it came to risk and come to an agreement, but there's now more and more risk transfer and burden being placed upon the contractor for the contractor to be able to have things worked out on their own. And, I suppose have a bit of a cynical side to me at the moment when I'm looking at the CDS, because the CDS has been promoted to local government at the moment as having this massive upside. And all of a sudden, here's an opportunity for the contractor to enjoy a little bit of upside, and the council wants to take most of that upside away from the contractor. So excuse me if I'm a little bit cynical when it comes to the CDS in relation to how things are going at the moment. And the Central Coast. So the Central Coast is out to tender at the moment. Greg, you'd probably have more attendees at this conference if it wasn't out to tender at the moment, but it is out at the moment. And let me give you a bit of a background on this slide. So in the last 7 or 8 months, there's been a lot of industrial action on the Central Coast. The TWU have really been given Remondis a really, really difficult time. There was a by-election on the Central Coast that took place, I think, a month or so ago. In the lead up to that by-election, the union went and knocked on the Premier's door and said, "Premier, we will help you in this by-electorate process, but we need to get some guarantees here." So the union, the Premier's office and the council cut a deal, and I'm going to call it the de facto EBA deal, because now there's a de facto EBA built into this contract. And it's not a great outcome for everybody, or for anybody really, in my opinion, the fact that now we've got a clause in this contract that acknowledges and agrees that the new incoming contractor, whether it be Remondis or whether it be another contractor, will make an offer of employment to the existing employees on the following terms. And just before I go on, Remondis themselves knew that if they wanted to be competitive, they needed to do something about this whole matter. So they took their current EBA to the Fair Work Commission, and they had the Fair Work Commission study it and review it in detail, and the Fair Work Commission passed a decision that the current Remondis EBA terminates with the conclusion of this contract, which I think is a great result for Remondis, because at least it now puts them on a level playing field with anybody who bids on this contract. So under the terms of clause 6.5, all employees will be employed by the new incoming contractor. There will be continuity of service from the date they started with Remondis. There will be no probationary period, so the rights of any incoming contractor to vet and work out whether these workers are going to be good for that contract have been taken away. What if some of these new employees fail drug and alcohol testing? What if they're not fit for work? What if they can't cope with the equipment that the new contractor is going to provide? That's been taken away from the new contractor, the right to employ the persons that they feel are best for the job. There'll be no probationary period, as I said. Accrued unused statutory entitlements will be recognised at the date of commencement. I don't know how Remondis feel about that. Do Remondis trust the incoming contractor? 2 minutes, 1 minute. The current contract, and this is important, the current contract has now got a clause in there that says the workers have to be paid at $27 an hour. Now, I've never seen a contract like this. The award is $22.85 per hour. Remondis currently pay $30.50 per hour. So it's going to be a no-win situation for all involved in this situation. And there'll be a 2.5% increase every 12 months built into the contract. Like I said, a de facto EBA, not great value outcome for anybody on this contract. Now, the big question is this. At $27 an hour, if there's a new incoming contractor, Remondis are accruing benefits at $30.50 per hour. How do you transfer entitlements across? Do you transfer them at $30.50 and give the incoming contractor a bit of a win on changeover? Or do Remondis transfer them at $27 an hour and have a bit of a profit on changeover? But this is not helpful when you get clauses like this in contracts. And finally, I'd just like to say thank you to Greg and to Emma for allowing us with this opportunity. We will continue the discussion over coming months. We've got an industry update of our own on the 15th of June. Look, contracts are worth many millions of dollars. They're 5, 7, 10-year terms. They're highly specialised. They're very competitive. They're great capital cost. And we are now down in Australia to only 7, 8 or 9 contractors who can bid on work. Okay?
Yeah, thanks, Tony.
And to put together,
Thanks, Tony.
And to put together a competitive bid, we're talking $50,000, and there are no prizes for running second.
All right, thanks, Tony.